My wedding day. My parents smiled, holding envelopes full of gift money from our guests, and said, "We're keeping this money. Your sister needs it more." But my husband had prepared an envelope of his own. When they opened it, everything fell apart. If you've ever felt like the forgotten child in your family, stay with me. Because this story will show you what happens when the quiet one finally says enough. And if you enjoy stories about justice and family boundaries, don't forget to subscribe. I promise you'll get value worth staying until the very end. My name is Madison. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been invisible in my own family. It wasn't always obvious. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations. Just a quiet, persistent pattern that shaped every major decision of my life. While my older sister Vanessa got the college fund, the new car for her 16th birthday, the down payment on her first apartment, I learned to ask for nothing. I was 12 when I first understood how things worked. Vanessa was 17, crying at the kitchen table because she'd wrecked Dad's car joyriding with friends. I watched from the hallway as Mom stroked her hair, whispering that everything would be okay. Dad made calls to his insurance guy, talking about how kids make mistakes. 2 months earlier, I'd asked if I could join the school orchestra. I'd been practicing violin for a year on a borrowed instrument, and my teacher said I had real talent. The rental fee was $45 a month. Mom had looked at Dad, and they'd both sighed in that way that meant no without saying the word. "Honey, we have to be realistic about expenses right now," Mom had said, already turning back to her magazine. I learned not to ask after that. When I needed money for field trips, I babysat. When I wanted new clothes, I wore Vanessa's hand-me-downs, even though she was 4 inches shorter and her style made me look ridiculous. When college came around, I applied for every scholarship I could find because I knew, without anyone saying it out loud, that the money would go to Vanessa first. She wanted to study fashion design at Parsons, one of the most expensive private schools in the country. The tuition was $60,000 a year. I got a full academic scholarship to a state school 2 hours away and worked 25 hours a week at a campus bookstore to cover my living expenses. "You're so independent, Madison," Mom would tell her friends, like it was a personality trait instead of necessity. "She never needs anything from us." But I did need things. I needed them to show up at my college graduation. Vanessa had a fashion emergency that same weekend, something about a showcase, so they drove to New York instead. I walked across that stage alone, my roommate's parents cheering for me louder than anyone. I needed them to care when I got my first real job, a junior marketing position that I'd worked myself sick to land. I called home excited, and Mom had said, "That's wonderful, honey," in the same voice she used when I told her I'd bought new dish soap. The pattern continued, and I accepted it. That was the worst part. I accepted it as normal. This was just how our family worked. Vanessa needed more, so she got more. I needed less, so I got less. The math was simple, even if it was suffocating. 3 years ago, I met Daniel at a work conference. He was a corporate attorney, 6 years older than me, with dark hair that was always slightly messy and a laugh that made everyone around him smile. We started talking about contract law, the most boring topic imaginable, and somehow ended up closing down the hotel bar at 2 in the morning, still deep in conversation. He was different from anyone I'd dated before. He noticed things. When I mentioned I was tired, he'd ask why, and actually listen to the answer. When I talked about my family, he'd get this look on his face, like he was solving a complex legal problem in his head. "Does your sister ever pay you back?" he asked once, about 6 months into our relationship. We were at my apartment, and I'd just gotten off the phone with Vanessa. She'd needed $1,500 to cover her rent after a temporary cash flow issue. "It's not like that," I'd said automatically. "It's family. You help family." "Madison." He'd taken my hand, his voice gentle but firm. "Family helps each other. What you're describing is one person being a bank." I'd laughed it off because the alternative was crying, and I'd done enough of that alone in my apartment over the years. But Daniel's words stayed with me, a seed planted in soil I'd thought was barren. When he proposed last Christmas in front of the ice skating rink at Rockefeller Center like something out of a movie, the first thing I felt was pure joy. The second thing I felt was dread because I absolutely knew, that somehow, some way, my family would find a way to make this about Vanessa too. I was right, just not in the way I'd expected. Vanessa was 32 now, still beautiful, still charming, and still completely unable to hold down a job for more than 8 months. She'd been fired 4 times in the last 2 years. The reasons varied: bad boss, jealous coworkers, company politics, but the pattern was clear to everyone except my parents. When we announced our engagement, Vanessa had smiled and hugged me, and for just a moment, I'd let myself hope things might be different this time. Then, 3 weeks later, Mom called. "Your sister's going through a really hard time right now," she'd said, her voice already laden with guilt. "She made a mistake with her taxes, hired the wrong accountant, and now she owes the IRS $18,000. They're threatening to freeze her accounts." I'd been making wedding centerpieces with my maid of honor, Rachel, when the call came. Rachel had watched my face change, already reaching for my wine glass to refill it. "Mom, I'm in the middle of planning a wedding," I'd said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't have $18,000 lying around." "We're not asking you to pay all of it," Mom had said, which meant they were absolutely asking me to pay all of it. "Just, if you could help. You know your father's back surgery maxed out our savings, and Vanessa's situation is urgent. The IRS deadline is next month." 1 month before my wedding, I'd looked at Rachel, who was shaking her head vigorously, mouthing, "No, no, no," like she was trying to ward off a curse. "I can't, Mom. I'm sorry." The silence on the other end had been deafening. "Well?" Mom had finally said, her voice cold in a way that felt like childhood rejection all over again. "I hope you can live with yourself if your sister ends up in legal trouble." She'd hung up before I could respond. For 3 days, I'd second-guessed my decision. Was I being selfish? Should I raid my savings one more time? Daniel had been the one to talk me down, showing me bank statements I'd forgotten about. 7 years of transactions to Vanessa that totaled $47,000, money I'd transferred for emergencies that never quite got repaid, loans that became gifts without either of us acknowledging the shift. "You've given enough," he'd said, and the permission to stop had felt like oxygen after years of holding my breath. My wedding day started perfectly. The sun was shining, my dress fit like a dream, and my bridesmaids were all in my hotel room, drinking champagne and telling stories that made me laugh until I cried. Rachel was fixing my veil when Mom arrived. She didn't compliment my dress. She didn't tear up or hug me or do any of the things I'd seen other mothers do in the bridal suite. She walked in, checked her phone twice, and said, "Vanessa's running late. She's been very stressed." Rachel's jaw tightened, but she stayed quiet. This was my day, and she was determined not to let anyone ruin it. "That's fine, Mom," I'd said, even though it wasn't fine. Even though my sister being late to my wedding with some half-hearted excuse was exactly the kind of thing that had happened my entire life. Mom had sat in the corner texting while my friends helped me into my dress, fixed my makeup, and reminded me to breathe. When it was time to go, she'd stood up and said, "I'll go check on the gift table," and left without another word. The ceremony was beautiful. The church was full of people who loved us, the music was perfect, and when Daniel lifted my veil and looked at me like I was the only person in the world, I forgot about everything else. In that moment, I was just a woman marrying the man she loved, and that was enough. Vanessa showed up 20 minutes late, slipping into a pew in the back. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that was close enough to white to make several guests whisper. I saw it, registered it, and decided not to care. I was done letting her steal my moments. The reception was at a beautiful vineyard an hour outside the city. String lights hung between oak trees, tables were covered in flowers I'd spent months choosing, and the dance floor was already packed with guests having the time of their lives. I felt lighter than I had in years. Daniel and I made our rounds, thanking people for coming, accepting congratulations and well wishes. I noticed my parents standing near the gift table talking quietly to each other, but I didn't think much of it. Mom had volunteered to watch the table. I'd actually been touched by the offer. We were about to do our first dance when Dad walked up to the DJ booth and asked for the microphone. Daniel's hand tightened on mine. "What's he doing?" "I don't know," I said, but something cold had settled in my stomach. Dad cleared his throat, and the room quieted down. If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment, I have an important family announcement. I felt every muscle in my body tense. Beside me, Daniel had gone very still. My wife and I, Dad continued, looking uncomfortable but determined, have made the decision to keep the monetary gifts from today's celebration. Our eldest daughter, Vanessa, is going through a significant financial crisis, and as a family, we've decided that she needs this support more than Madison and Daniel do right now. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people listening, but the shocked silence of people who couldn't believe what they were hearing. Mom stepped forward, her smile tight and false. Madison has always been so understanding and independent. She'll be fine. But Vanessa is in real trouble, and family helps family. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. They were stealing my wedding gift money in front of 200 people. They were announcing it like it was a charitable donation, like they were doing something noble. Vanessa was sitting at her table, staring at her plate. She wasn't protesting. She wasn't stopping them. I felt Rachel's arm around my shoulders, heard her whisper something, but I couldn't make out the words over the ringing in my ears. This was it. This was the moment that finally broke me. Not quietly, not privately, but in front of everyone I cared about. Daniel released my hand and walked toward my parents. His face was calm, almost pleasant, but I knew him well enough to see the fury underneath. "Since we're making announcements," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I have something for you, too." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a black envelope. My parents looked confused, probably expecting a check or cash, their prize for raising such an understanding daughter. "This is for you," Daniel said, handing it to Dad, "since you've decided to make this a public matter." Dad opened the envelope, and I watched his face change from confusion to shock to something that looked like fear. Mom leaned over, reading the documents, and her hand flew to her mouth. Daniel took the microphone from Dad's slack grip. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady and clear, "what you're holding, sir, is documentation of $47,000 that Madison has given to your family over the past 6 years, loans that were never repaid, emergencies that kept happening. Every transaction is itemized there, with dates and bank statements." He turned to address the room, and I finally understood what was happening. What Madison's parents want to take today is estimated at $15,000 to $20,000 in gift money. Money that our guests so generously brought to celebrate our marriage. The document also includes a legal letter from my attorney explaining that if they take one single dollar of that money, we will be filing a lawsuit to recover the entire $47,000, plus compensation for emotional damages and financial exploitation. The room erupted, not in cheers, not yet, but in whispers, gasps, and murmurs of shock. Mom's face had gone bright red. She was shaking, the papers trembling in her hands. "This is a family matter," she said, her voice breaking. "This isn't appropriate." "You made it appropriate," Daniel said, and his voice had gone cold now. "When you announced your intention to steal from my wife in front of all these people, you made it public. I'm simply responding in kind." Dad tried to speak, but no words came out. He looked at me for the first time since the announcement, and whatever he saw in my face made him look away. Vanessa stood up from her table, her chair scraping loudly. "You're ruining my life," she shouted, and heads turned to stare at her. "I need that money. The IRS is going to—" "And I needed the last 6 years of my life," I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I needed my college trip to Europe that I canceled to pay off your credit card debt. I needed my 25th birthday party that didn't happen because you had an emergency medical bill. I needed the house down payment I gave up so you could start a business that failed in 6 months, but I gave you those things, Vanessa. I gave them quietly, without making you beg, without humiliating you in public, and you never said thank you. Not once." She tried to push past her table, but my bridesmaids had somehow materialized in her path, a united front of satin and righteous anger. "Stay," Rachel said, her voice like steel. "You wanted family help? Stay and hear what family really means." The vineyard had gone completely silent. 200 people stared at my family like we were actors in a play they hadn't bought tickets for. I could feel the weight of their eyes, their judgment, their pity. But for the first time in my life, the pity wasn't directed at me. Daniel held up another document, this one crisp and official-looking. "This is a cease and desist letter," he said, his attorney voice in full effect. "It states that Madison's parents are not to contact her requesting financial assistance ever again. Any violation will be considered harassment and will be met with legal action." Mom's hand went to her chest, and for a second, I thought she might actually faint. "After everything we did for you," she whispered, but the microphone caught it anyway. "We raised you. We gave you a home." "You raised me to be an ATM," I said, and my voice was steady now, stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Everything you did for Vanessa. I was just there, funding her life with mine." Dad looked around the room at all the people watching us, his co-workers, our extended family, friends from church. His face was the color of old newspaper. "This is embarrassing," he said, like that was the real crime here. "We should discuss this privately." "Like you discussed stealing my gift money privately?" I asked. "No, Dad. You made this choice. You stood up in front of everyone I love and announced you were taking money that wasn't yours. Daniel just made sure everyone knew the whole story." An older woman I didn't recognize stood up from her table near the back. She had silver hair and wore a navy dress that looked expensive. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "I'm Daniel's Aunt Patricia. I'm also a family law attorney, and I've been practicing for 32 years. She looked at my parents with the kind of cold assessment that probably terrified people in courtrooms. "What you've just admitted to, taking your daughter's property without permission, is theft. The fact that you announced it publicly actually makes this easier to prosecute. You have witnesses now, hundreds of them." My parents looked at each other, and I saw genuine fear pass between them. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. They were supposed to take the money. I was supposed to be understanding like always, and life was supposed to continue with the same pattern we'd followed for 28 years. Vanessa was crying now, loud, gasping sobs that made several guests uncomfortable, but no one moved to comfort her. I watched as people who'd known our family for years, Dad's college roommate, Mom's book club friends, neighbors from when we were kids, looked at her with something between disappointment and disgust. "I can't believe you'd do this to me," Vanessa said, looking at me with red, swollen eyes. "On my wedding day?" "It's Madison's wedding day," Rachel interrupted sharply. "You know, the woman who spent 6 years giving you everything while you gave nothing back? That's whose day this is." "Stay out of this," Vanessa shrieked. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Rachel said. "I've watched my best friend sacrifice herself for you over and over again. I've held her while she cried because she couldn't afford rent after bailing you out. I've watched her apologize for having needs because she was so used to yours being the only ones that mattered. I understand better than you think." My mother tried again, her voice taking on that martyred tone I'd heard my whole life. "Madison, honey, you know we love you. We just thought, with Daniel's job and your career, you'd be fine. Vanessa doesn't have those resources." "Vanessa's 32, Daniel said flatly. "She's not a child. She's an adult who's never faced a single consequence because you've always been there to catch her." He turned to address the room again. "The gift table is secure. Our venue coordinator has been guarding it since before the ceremony started. Every envelope is accounted for. No one," he looked pointedly at my parents, "has taken anything." That's when I understood. Daniel had known. Somehow he'd known this was coming, and he'd protected me from it before I even knew I needed protecting. I looked at my husband because that's what he was now, officially, legally, forever, and felt something crack open in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was relief so intense it almost felt like breaking. "I think you should leave," I said to my parents, and my voice didn't shake at all. "You've said what you came to say. Now go." "Madison," Mom started, but I held up my hand. "No, no more. I'm done being the daughter who understands. I'm done being the sister who sacrifices. I'm done funding a life that will never appreciate me. You wanted Vanessa to have money? Fine. Give her yours, but you will never touch mine again. Dad's face went through several emotions: anger, shame, defiance, before settling on something that looked like resignation. He took Mom's arm, and they walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for them like water, no one meeting their eyes. Vanessa stood frozen at her table, looking around like she expected someone to defend her. No one did. Finally, she grabbed her purse and ran after our parents, her heels clicking frantically on the stone pathway. The door closed behind them, and for a long moment, no one moved. Then Daniel's Aunt Patricia started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster, until the whole room erupted in applause. People were standing, cheering, and I realized with a shock that they were cheering for me. Daniel pulled me close, his arms around me, his voice in my ear. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't want you stressed before today. How did you know? I asked, my face pressed against his shoulder. I heard your mom on the phone with Vanessa 2 weeks ago. I was at your apartment early and she called. Speakerphone. Your mom said, "Don't worry, we'll get the money from Madison's wedding." And Vanessa said, "But what if she gets mad?" And your mom said, "She'll understand, like always." I finished and felt tears start to slide down my cheeks. Not sad tears, angry tears, relieved tears, free tears. I couldn't let it happen, Daniel said. So I talked to my attorney, pulled all your bank records. You'd given me access for the joint account and compiled everything. I had 2 lawyers here as guests today, recording everything just in case. The envelope was my insurance policy. I pulled back to look at him. You did all that for me? Madison. He cupped my face in his hands. I would do anything for you. You've spent your whole life protecting everyone else. It was time someone protected you. The DJ, who'd been standing awkwardly by his equipment this whole time, cleared his throat. Should I play something? Play our first dance song, I said, and I was smiling now, really smiling, for the first time since Dad had taken that microphone. The opening notes of "The Way You Look Tonight" filled the vineyard, and Daniel led me onto the dance floor. As we swayed together, I could hear our guests starting to relax again, conversations starting up, the party finding its rhythm. I love you, I whispered against his chest. I love you more, he said. And Madison, you never have to be understanding again, not if it costs you this much. The rest of the reception was perfect. Better than perfect, actually, because there was no tension anymore, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. My parents were gone, Vanessa was gone, and I was surrounded by people who actually loved me, not for what I could give them, but for who I was. Rachel gave a toast that made me cry and laugh at the same time. Daniel's college roommate told embarrassing stories that had everyone in tears. My grandmother, my dad's mother, pulled me aside and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. I'm so proud of you, she said. I've watched them do this to you for years, and I've bitten my tongue because I didn't think it was my place. But sweetheart, you deserved better. You always deserved better. Why didn't anyone say anything? I asked, and I wasn't angry, just curious. Because you seemed okay with it, she said gently. You never complained. You never said no. I thought, maybe I was wrong about what I was seeing. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have said something. It's not your fault, I told her. I trained everyone to think I was fine with it. I'm the one who had to stop. By the time the reception ended, it was past midnight. Daniel and I stood in the parking lot, waving goodbye to the last guests, my feet killing me in my heels, but my heart lighter than it had been in years. Ready to go? Daniel asked, and I nodded. Our hotel suite was beautiful, a wedding gift from Daniel's parents, who'd always treated me like I was someone worth celebrating. There was champagne waiting, rose petals on the bed, all the romantic touches I'd dreamed about. But I just stood at the window, looking out at the city lights, trying to process everything that had happened. Are you okay? Daniel came up behind me, his hands on my shoulders. I think so, I said. I mean, my parents just tried to rob me at my wedding. My sister made it clear she thinks she's entitled to everything I have. I essentially cut off my entire immediate family in front of 200 people. So, yeah, I'm great." He laughed, and it startled me into laughing too. "It's kind of funny, isn't it?" I said. "In a horrible, traumatic way?" "It's going to make one hell of a story for our kids someday," he said. "Our kids?" I repeated, and the phrase felt like a promise of something better. A family I could build myself, one where no one was invisible. The next morning, my phone had 83 text messages. I scrolled through them over room service breakfast, Daniel reading over my shoulder. Most were from friends and extended family, messages of support and love. Some were from people I hadn't talked to in years, saying they'd heard what happened and wanted me to know they were proud of me. 3 messages were from my parents. "Mom, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand." "Dad, you're making a mistake. Family is family." Mom again, "Your sister is devastated. I hope you can sleep at night knowing what you've done to her." I showed Daniel the messages. He read them, his jaw tightening. "You don't have to respond." "I know," I said, "but I want to, just this once. I want to say what I've never been able to say." I typed carefully, reading it out loud as I went. "Mom, Dad, I love you. I probably always will, but I'm done being the bank. I'm done being the understanding one. I'm done sacrificing my life for Vanessa's comfort. You chose your favorite daughter a long time ago. I'm just finally accepting that choice. Don't contact me again unless you're ready to treat me like I matter." Madison. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked. "Terrified," I admitted, "and free." We left for our honeymoon in Bali that afternoon. For 2 weeks, I turned off my phone completely. We snorkeled, explored temples, ate amazing food, and I practiced the art of being unavailable. No emergencies could reach me. No guilt could find me. It was the first vacation I'd ever taken where I wasn't checking my phone every hour, waiting for the text that would tell me I was needed somewhere else. When we got back, real life was waiting. But it was a different real life than the one I'd left. The Monday after we returned, I started therapy. Dr. Chen was a specialist in family dynamics and trauma, and she didn't waste time with platitudes. "What you experienced is called financial exploitation," she said in our first session. "It's a form of family manipulation where one person is consistently used as a resource without reciprocation or appreciation." "They didn't mean to hurt me," I said automatically, then stopped. "Sorry, that's what I always say." "Why do you think you always say that?" she asked. "Because if they meant to hurt me, that makes them bad people. And if they're bad people, then I've wasted my whole life trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "That's a painful truth to sit with." "Yeah," I said, and started crying for what felt like the 100th time that week. Over the next few months, I learned terms for things I'd experienced my whole life. Parentification, the scapegoat and golden child dynamic, conditional love. Each session felt like putting on glasses for the first time. Suddenly, patterns I'd accepted as normal came into sharp, painful focus. I also learned that healing wasn't about forgiving my parents or reconciling with Vanessa. It was about building a life where their opinions didn't dictate my worth. Daniel and I used the gift money, all $18,500 of it, as a down payment on a house. A real house, with a yard and a guest room and space to grow. Every time I walked through the door, I thought about how close I'd come to losing that money and how Daniel had protected it, protected me. My relationship with my extended family shifted too. My grandmother started calling me every Sunday just to talk. My aunt invited us to Thanksgiving at her house, explicitly stating that my parents wouldn't be there. "We're having 2 Thanksgivings this year," she explained. "One for people who know how to appreciate what they have, and one for people who still need to learn. You're invited to the first one." It felt strange being chosen like that, but also right. Vanessa tried to reach out exactly once, 3 months after the wedding. A long email that started with "I'm sorry" and ended with "I need help with my car payment." I read it, showed it to Daniel, and then deleted it without responding. My parents sent a few more texts over the months. Guilt trips disguised as concern. demands disguised as invitations. Each one got easier to ignore. 6 months after the wedding, I found out I was pregnant. I took the test in our bathroom, Daniel waiting on the other side of the door, both of us too nervous to breathe. When the 2 lines appeared, I opened the door and just held up the test, tears streaming down my face. "We're having a baby," Daniel said, and his voice cracked on the last word. I posted the announcement on social media carefully. A cute photo of baby shoes, nothing too revealing. Within an hour, my phone was flooded with congratulations from friends, co-workers, and chosen family. 2 hours later, Mom texted, "Congratulations! We'd like to be involved in the baby's life." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me, the old part, the part that still remembered being 12 and desperate for approval, wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that a grandchild might be the thing that finally made them see me. But the new part of me, the part that had been growing stronger since the wedding, knew better. I typed, "Thank you for the congratulations. If you want to be involved, we need to have a conversation first. A real one with a family therapist present, where you acknowledge the hurt you've caused and we set clear boundaries going forward. If you're willing to do that work, I'm willing to talk. If not, my answer is no." Mom's response came within minutes. "We've done nothing wrong. We're your parents. We shouldn't need therapy to see our grandchild." I showed Daniel the message. He read it and sighed. "You know what you need to do." "Yeah," I said. "I do." I blocked their numbers. Not out of anger, but out of preservation. I was building something new, a family where love didn't come with conditions, where giving wasn't one-sided, where children would be valued equally and never used as banks. My parents couldn't be part of that. Not as they were, maybe not ever. At my baby shower, 4 months later, I was surrounded by people who'd shown up for me consistently. Rachel, who'd been with me through every crisis. Daniel's parents, who treated me like I was their daughter. My grandmother, my aunt, cousins I'd reconnected with. Friends from work who'd become family. No one asked about my parents. No one suggested I should reconcile. They'd all been there that day, or heard the story, or seen enough to understand. When the baby came, a beautiful girl we named Sophie, she entered a world without toxic patterns to inherit. She'd never know what it felt like to be the invisible child. She'd never learn to make herself smaller so someone else could be bigger. Daniel and I stood over her crib one night watching her sleep, and he took my hand. "You broke the cycle," he said softly. "You know that, right? Whatever your parents did to you, you're making sure it ends here." "We're making sure," I corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But you took the first step. At our wedding, when you could have backed down like you always had before, you didn't. You stood there and let me hand them that envelope. You let the truth come out. That took courage." I thought about that night often. The moment my father opened that black envelope, the shock on my mother's face, the way the whole room had held its breath. If someone had told me a year ago that my wedding would end with me cutting off my family in front of 200 people, I would have been horrified. Now, I saw it differently. That wasn't the day my family fell apart. It was the day I finally saw clearly what my family had been all along and made the choice to build something better. People ask me sometimes if I regret how things went down, if I wish I'd handled it differently, more privately, more gently. My answer is always the same: no. Because if not for that moment, that public, painful, humiliating moment, I might have spent the rest of my life as an ATM. I might have taught my daughter the same lessons I'd learned, that your worth is measured in what you give, that love is conditional, that some people matter more than others. Daniel didn't ruin my wedding. He saved my life. And if you're reading this or listening and you see yourself in my story, if you're the one who always gives and never receives, the one who's always understanding, always flexible, always there when someone needs money or help or sacrifice, please hear me. You deserve better. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. Walking away isn't cruel. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is save yourself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to make the hard choice between family loyalty and self-preservation, leave a comment. Tell me your story. You're not alone in this. And remember, Subscribe if you want more stories about finding your strength, setting boundaries, and building the life you actually deserve. Because you do deserve it, all of it.